Hey guys, Bluffmunkey back again for Sonic Academy, and in today's video I want to take a quick look at audio rate modulation. It's not quite as complicated as it sounds. Let's get stuck in. Right, so first things first, we need to describe what audio rate modulation is. So you're probably familiar with traditional forms of modulation within a synth. So we can use an LFO, or a low frequency oscillator. That just means it oscillates slowly. And generally speaking, anything under about 20 hertz is considered an LFO, technically speaking. Anything above 20 hertz, which is where human hearing starts hearing pitch, is considered audio rate modulation. But there's a little bit of a crossover period where you hear it change. So let's have a look at that. So first things first, the most familiar form of audio rate modulation you may be recognizing is FM, or frequency modulation. So just quickly going over that, if we take a look at the FM knob in Ana 2, I'm going to change oscillator 1 to a sine because that's the most traditionally used oscillator for frequency modulation. We're also going to set a sine wave up on oscillator 2. We're going to give it one voice, but we're going to take the volume all the way down. We don't need to hear the oscillator for it to take effect. So at the moment, oscillator 2 is exactly the same as oscillator 1. And what we can do is take a look at EQ8 in spectrum mode. And if I play a note, let's make sure this is all the way down. If I play a note, you can see the frequency here is around 147 hertz, 146 to 147 hertz. So we know that oscillator 2 is running 147 hertz, 147 cycles per second. So that's well above 20 hertz. So that's well into audio rate range. Now, if we turn up, and we know it's 147 hertz because I haven't repitched it against oscillator 1. Okay, so oscillator 2 is running at the same octave, same tuning. So if we turn the FM knob up on oscillator 1, you can hear that familiar FM tone. Now if I take oscillator 2 down an octave, and then we use the FM knob, the timbre, or quality of the sound, changes. That's because we've actually dropped the tuning of oscillator 2 by an octave. So we can see what that means. Let me just turn the FM down again. So if we drop oscillator 1 by an octave as well, so we now know that's running at around 73 hertz. 73, something like that. So let's put oscillator 1 back. So now oscillator 2 is modulating the pitch of oscillator 1, FM, by 73 hertz. Oops, wrong one. So traditionally speaking, let's take FM all the way down. So it's the same as doing this. So let's assign LFO 1 to, will affect fine pitch. Just turn oscillator 2 off for a second. We don't need that anymore. So we're doing the same thing fundamentally with this LFO here. So we're using a sine wave in the LFO, and LFO 1 is oscillating the pitch of oscillator 1. So we can get into FM territory if we look at the rate dial here. So we can see that goes up to 200 hertz, so well into audio rate range. So before, when we were using oscillator 2 as our audio rate modulator, we were around 73 hertz. So we've got the same kind of sound there. So that's basically what FM is doing. But we can use these audio rate modulations to modulate anything. So what I'm going to do here, we don't need this anymore. So I'm just trying to describe the difference between LFOs and audio rate modulation. Audio rate modulation just means really quick, basically, really fast modulation. So it goes from, in fact, let's just put this back a second. If we take the rate down, let's just describe this with our ears. So at this rate, you can actually hear the wobbling. So try and have a listen to what happens when you transfer from below 20 hertz to above 20 hertz. Again, there's a little bit of a grey area, a smush area, but you'll hear it changing from one type of modulation sound, the sound that you perceive, to another. So around now. So it changes from a wobble to almost a coarse tone. So the first thing I want to do is I want to use something like a square wave. And this is one of my favorite uses for audio rate modulation. And we're going to use a very, very fast, almost noise oscillator. Now, we don't have a noise oscillator in the LFOs in ANA 2, but I'm going to use a sample and hold oscillator, which is fundamentally a random stepped oscillator. So we're going to set the LFO destination as pitch fine again. I'm just choosing all to make sure I capture all oscillators that I'm using. So we're going to use a combination of the depth and rate knobs to modulate the pitch of oscillator 1. So at the moment, we're at 16.3 hertz. So this is cycling through 16 times a second. You can hear it sounds almost like that archetypal computerized sound that they used in the 60s. But we want this going much, much faster. So let's take the depth down a little bit. So you might be familiar with that kind of hollow sound. It's used a lot in trance. But for me, even this isn't fast enough. So we're up to 200 hertz, but this is going through the steps on the LFO shape itself. So what we can do, if you want to customize it even further, is use the G envelope. Let me just clear this quickly. Oops, I want to open that up. I don't want that one. So I'm going to take the horizontal grid. Can I type this in? No. So I'm going to take this all the way up to 32 steps. I'm going to hold down the shift key, and very quickly I'm just going to put in 32 random step values here. Okay, so that's done. So what I've basically done is something similar to the sample and hold oscillator, but it's a slightly higher resolution. So if we use the same destination here, pitch fine, take the amount all the way down, and I'm going to slowly increase this rate again. And you'll hear this is a much finer coarseness. Taking this all the way down. So if we apply a filter to this to soften the sound up a little bit, just get a standard. So it adds this very gritty, coarse quality to our square wave, which otherwise sounds quite hollow. So it's often a good idea, let me just turn the volume down on this a little bit. It's often a good idea to apply some reverb. I'm just using an instance of Supermassive here. So what I like to do So basically what I'm doing is I'm using the velocity applied to the filter envelope. So I can play softer or harder to open the filter up. But this really does add a nice crunchy quality to an otherwise quite hollow sounding square wave. I like that. So let's have a look at another use for this. And I'd just like to say that there's millions of uses for audio rate modulation. It's used a lot in dubstep and neuro-based kind of thing, where it's used very aggressively. Now, that's not for me. I prefer to use it in a more subtle way. So the examples I'm giving you here today obviously aren't exhaustive. They're just a couple of ways that I'd use them. Okay, so let's have a look at applying audio rate modulation to another destination. So let's try, I'm going to go back to something like a sine wave. I'm going to just scratch that out for a second. Let's try oscillator 1's pulse width. That might be a good one to do. Okay, so immediately we've got the audio rate, the LFO rate right up at 200 hertz here. Immediately you can hear, let me just open the filter up as well. It's a different kind of coarseness, but what I might want to do here is I might want to apply some extra modulation to the LFO depth. So if I apply velocity to that, let's go into the mod section, we don't want it. Okay, so what's happening now is this LFO depth is actually being modulated by the velocity. So the harder I hit the note, the more modulation we're getting. Let's pull the cutoff back down. So again, it's adding this interesting texture. I'm going to actually pull the amount here down a little bit. So I'm using this amount. This is how much of the LFO has been sent to the pulse width. So it's been controlled here. You can do the depth here, which is on the LFO itself, and I'm using the velocity. So I'm using these different controls to kind of calibrate it to where I want it to be. It's a little bit difficult to do it in the mod section because we don't have the resolution we need here. So I'm using this amount knob 2 to increase the resolution of control I've got, if that makes sense. And again, I want you to try and think about using this in conjunction with effects, because it's how, quite often, these kinds of sounds, it's how it interacts with the effects that really does produce the magic. Let's drop this an octave. Okay, so that's another use for it. So let's try and do one more example. Okay, this time, let's just clear this LFO for a second. This time, I'm going to choose one of the wavetables, the morphing wavetables. Let's try, I don't know, anyone, doesn't matter. Yeah, that might work. And I'm going to drop this an octave. Maybe 2 eventually, I don't know. And what I want to do is I want to control this. I'm doing filter mouth. I want to control this morph dial with the G envelope. Too much. And what it's worth doing as well is in the same way that this works with FM or frequency modulation, you might find that there's a sweet spot with the rate control. There might be a sweet spot where the harmonics are just, the added harmonics are just working with the sound that you're trying to create. So let's just have a listen to that. I'm not hating that. And then we can do the same thing again with the velocity. So we can use the velocity to adjust the amount of this LFO or G envelope. So let's assign that to velocity. Where's it put it in here? Okay, right down here. And I am going to drop this another octave. And again, put the effects on. Come into the modulation section again. Just want to take this down. So I'm adjusting the amount of modulation from the G envelope in the mod matrix as well. And again, that's just adding the resolution on top of this amount control. So you're doubling up on the amount control you've got. So if I take this all the way down, it's not the worst sound in the world, but when we add the audio rate modulation, so yeah, that's pretty much it. And what I would encourage you to do is you can create your own LFO shapes, effectively LFO shapes in the G envelope. And that will allow you to really fine tune the sweet spot of where this audio rate modulation is sitting with the sound that you want to create. And you can really apply it to anything. You can apply it to, it's applied a lot to filters as well. In fact, let's do that quickly. If I clear everything out here. Let's just have a sine wave applied. Let's switch the filter on first. Let's try the Moog. Just do a basic plucky sound. So we can use LFO 1, assign that to filter. Let's put it on filter 1 frequency. So at the moment, this is not audio rate. This is at 5.98 hertz, just under 6 times a second. But as we increase, again, as we increase this rate knob, you'll hear it as it goes from 20 hertz above. You'll hear it kind of transform into a different kind of sound. And again, we're using the rate to fine tune it to the sound that we're trying to create. That's quite nice, isn't it? Depth down a little bit, I think. So it's just, again, it's layering up these grungy, crunchy, massively expanded harmonics, and it's just a case of experimenting. So I hope you found that explanation useful for audio rate modulation, and I'll see you guys again soon. Cheers.